What if I told you that some of the biggest market moves, they're not driven by headlines or earnings reports or some breaking news story? What if there's a hidden, almost invisible engine under the hood of the market that, when the conditions are just right, can completely hijack everything and drive us straight into a crash? Well, that force has a name. It's called Vanna, and we're about to pull back the curtain on how it really works.
So, we're all trained to look for the why when stocks go crazy, right? A bad jobs report, a tweet from a CEO, some big geopolitical event. But here's the thing, a huge chunk of the daily trading volume isn't driven by human opinions at all. Nope. It's all about the automatic hedging done by market makers, dictated by some really powerful and, let's be honest, pretty obscure mathematics.
And that brings us to the main character of our story today, Vanna. Yeah, I know it sounds like a person's name, but in the world of options trading, it's this incredibly powerful force that can flip from being the market's best friend to its absolute worst enemy in a heartbeat. All right, so to really understand Vanna, we first have to meet the family. In the options world, risk is measured by this whole set of variables they call the Greeks. And their entire job is to tell traders how an options price is going to change when the market starts moving around. So let's start with the big one, Vega. You've heard of the VIX, right? The market's fear gauge? Well, Vega is super simple. It just tells you how much an options price is going to move if that fear level, that volatility, goes up or down. It's really the most direct way to measure volatility risk. But here's where things get really interesting. Vanna is the bridge between two different worlds. The first world is an options delta, which is just a fancy way of saying its exposure to the stock's price moving up or down. The second world is volatility, market fear. Vanna tells us how much that directional bet changes when fear suddenly spikes or collapses in the market. It connects price to fear. And the last piece of this puzzle is Volga. Now, if Vega tells you how options react to fear, Volga tells you how fast that reaction changes. You could literally call it the volatility of volatility. It's what helps traders understand risk during those really chaotic moments, when fear itself becomes completely unpredictable. To really get a feel for Vanna's unique power, let's put it side by side with its cousin, charm. As you can see here, charm is all about time. It creates these slow, predictable drifts as an option gets closer to its expiration date. But Vanna is volatility-driven. It couldn't care less about the calendar. It cares about sudden shocks. It's the force behind those violent, reactive snaps that seem to come from absolutely nowhere. So right now, you're probably thinking Vanna sounds pretty dangerous. And it can be. But here's the twist. Most of the time, it's actually an incredibly powerful force for stability. It acts kind of like the market's own shock absorber. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, this part is absolutely crucial. The big market makers, the dealers who are in the middle of all this options trading, they don't want to make bets. Their whole goal is to be perfectly neutral. To do that, they are constantly buying and selling the underlying stock to cancel out the risks they're taking on from all the options on their books. And it's these massive automatic hedging flows that often become the real force moving the market. All right, let's walk through how this normally works, the good scenario. It all starts when investors sell put options. Think of it as insurance against a market drop. To dealers. Now, as long as the market is stable, these puts are out of the money. But say the market dips a little and volatility spikes up. Vanna kicks in. This changes the dealer's risk. And to get back to neutral, they are forced to buy the underlying stock. And that buying creates a cushion, a floor, that actually slows down the fall. It's a really elegant, self-correcting system. But that stability isn't free. As we're about to find out, the exact same force that protects the market has a really dark side. And under just the right, or maybe I should say just the wrong conditions, that shock absorber can completely snap and become an engine of pure chaos. And this is the twist in our story. This is the moment where Vanna goes from hero to villain. Let's dig into the exact conditions that cause the market's protector to turn on it and become its biggest attacker. It all comes down to one critical moment, which you can see right here. The market falls so hard and so fast that all of those puts, all that insurance, suddenly become in the money. They're now profitable. And at that exact point, the whole game flips. When volatility spikes now, Vanna's effect goes into overdrive. And to stay neutral against these now profitable puts, dealers are forced to sell the underlying stock aggressively into an already crashing market.
And this kicks off a terrifying feedback loop. The dealers sell, which pushes the market down even more, which makes volatility spike higher, which forces them to sell even more stock. It's a self-reinforcing crash loop, a mechanical death spiral that has absolutely nothing to do with fundamentals or news. It is just the machine doing exactly what it was programmed to do and sucking all the liquidity out of the market in the process.
So with a force this powerful, of course traders tried to figure out how to model it, how to control it, and this led to the creation of something called the Vanna Volga pricing model. And what's cool is this wasn't dreamed up in some academic lab, it was born right there on the trading floor. You know, what's so fascinating about this model's history is that it didn't come from some ivory tower. It started out in the 80s as a practical rule of thumb for traders. It was their street-smart way of accounting for the real-world risks of Vanna. And it worked so well that it eventually got baked into the very first online trading platforms. And later on, it was formalized and spread all across Wall Street. So what does this thing actually do? Well, at its heart, the Vanna Volga model is basically a patch. It takes the classic option pricing formula, the famous Black-Scholes model, and it adds a correction. It essentially calculates the extra cost of having to hedge the wild risks that come from Vanna and Volga, risks that the older, simpler models just completely ignored. But here we are, at the final, critical twist in the story. This practical, intuitive model, this trader's rule of thumb, it has a deep and really dangerous flaw. It's a paradox that forces you to choose between two essential things: having consistent prices or having stable risk management. You can't have both. Okay, I know this looks a little complex, but stick with me, the idea is actually pretty simple. Look at the chart on the left. The raw, unfiltered Vanna Volga model can sometimes do something that makes no logical sense. It can price a safer option as being more expensive than a riskier one. That's a huge problem. So what traders do, as you can see on the right, is apply a simple fix. They just cap the price to make sure it never does that. Seems like an easy solution, right? Well, not exactly, because that simple little fix creates a massive side effect. It's like hammering a dent out of a car door, only to create a much bigger one somewhere else. By forcing the prices to look clean and behave, it makes the underlying risk metrics, the very tools traders need to hedge themselves, totally jumpy and unstable. And this slide shows you the dangerous result of that so-called fix. Look at those orange lines. See those sharp kinks? Those sudden vertical jumps in the risk profiles? Imagine you're a trader. 1 second, your risk dashboard looks fine. The market moves just a tiny bit, and suddenly your models are screaming that your risk has exploded out of nowhere. It makes trying to hedge precisely and safely almost impossible. This quote from Math Finance just nails the dilemma perfectly. It's a classic catch-22. You can have smooth, consistent prices, which you need, or you can have stable, reliable risk metrics for hedging, which you also need. But with this model, you simply can't have both at the same time. You're forced to choose between unstable hedging or prices so illogical that they invite people to trade against you. And that leaves us with one final, really important question. When we create these simplified models to try and navigate the insane complexity of financial markets, are we actually building a helpful shortcut that gets us most of the way there? Or are we accidentally setting a dangerous trap, where the small, inconvenient details we chose to ignore in our models become the very things that cause them and the market itself to completely break down?